My hands were already in the water before my brain caught up with what I was doing. The river was trying to kill me. Every nerve ending I had was screaming that. The cold punched through my coat like it was paper, wrapped around my ribs and squeezed. I couldn't breathe. I could barely see. But underneath me, tangled in the current, something massive was dying. And its eyes, gold as a lit candle in black water, were looking straight at me. Not through me. At me. Like it was asking. Like it knew I was the only one who would answer. I have made a lot of decisions in my life that people called foolish, reckless, too much heart, not enough sense. But I have never once regretted the ones I made in the dark, in the cold, with everything on the line. I reached in, and I pulled. What came out of that river changed everything. Not just for me, for all of us. Before we step into the story, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Are you hearing this under the midnight moon, or in the quiet of the afternoon? Drop it in the comments. Now, let's dive in. Chapter 1. The Pull. The rope burned through my palms as I hauled with everything I had, my boots slipping in the mud at the river's edge, the Kalder River fighting me for him, like it had decided he was already hers. He was enormous. Even half submerged, even limp and waterlogged and barely moving, I could feel the impossible weight of him, not just in my arms, but in the air around him. Something about this wolf was wrong, in the best and worst possible way. Wrong, because wolves do not grow this large. Wrong, because the wound on his flank was not from any trap or tooth I had ever seen. It was long and deliberate, carved with intention. Wrong, because he was still looking at me. My name is Elira Nightbane. I am 23 years old. I live on the edge of the Kalder Wilderness in northern Idaho, in a house my grandmother left me, and I have spent the last 4 years running a one-woman wildlife rescue out of the barn attached to it. I have pulled deer from fences, hawks from power lines, a black bear cub from a drainage pipe on the highway. I have never been afraid of an animal in distress, but I had never felt what I felt when those gold eyes found mine in the black water. It was not fear. It was recognition. I don't know how else to say it. I looked at this wolf, this dying, massive, impossible wolf, and something in my chest said, "I know you," which made no sense, which I pushed away immediately and hauled again on the rope, my muscles screaming, my knees sinking into the mud. He came out of the river in pieces. First his head, then his shoulders, then the full, terrible weight of him sliding onto the bank, while I fell backward into the snow and gasped for air I hadn't realized I'd been holding. He lay on his side, chest barely moving. The wound at his flank was dark and ragged, and very bad, and the temperature was well below freezing, and I had maybe 40 minutes before hypothermia finished what the river had started. I did not stand there processing it. "No," I said out loud, to a wolf at 5 a.m. in January. "You don't get to quit." I was already on my knees. Getting him to the barn took 40 minutes and every scrap of determination I own. I used the equipment sled, the old aluminum one I drag feet on, and I moved him in stages, rolling his massive body onto it with my full body weight, lashing him down with the bungee cords I keep on the fence post for exactly these moments. The moments people say will never happen. They always happen. My property runs a 1/4 mile from the river to the barn, uphill, through snow that had crusted over in the night, cold and crunched under the sled like broken glass. My arms gave out twice. I stopped, pressed my forehead to the cold metal of the sled rail, breathed, and kept going. The sky above me was that deep, pre-dawn purple that is the closest thing to black, without being black, and my breath came out in white clouds, and somewhere behind me, the Kalder River kept moving like nothing had happened at all. I got him inside. The barn lights were yellow and warm, and the smell hit me, hay and wood, and the familiar animal warmth of it, and I felt my shoulders drop 2 full inches just from being out of the wind. I cut away the matted fur around his wound with surgical scissors, working fast and methodical, hands steady from years of practice. The gash was deep. 3, maybe 4 inches at its center, jagged at the edges but not torn the way a bite would be, not crushed the way a trap leaves its mark. This was cut. Something had cut this wolf deliberately. Something that knew exactly where to place a wound to cause maximum damage without immediately killing. That was not an accident. That was someone who wanted him to suffer on the way out. I packed the wound with sterile gauze from my emergency kit, wrapped it as tight as I could manage, and taped it with medical tape across the fur. I checked his breathing, shallow but deepening. His temperature was dangerously low, but the barn was warm and climbing. I got every blanket I owned. I got the space heater from the house. I dragged my sleeping bag in and layered it over his back and side, and then sat down on the concrete floor and pressed my palm flat against his ribcage and held it there. In, out. Slow. Steadying. Good. I don't know when I fell asleep. I was sitting against the hay bales with my hand on his side, listening to him breathe, and then the gray pre-dawn light was coming through the high barn window, and I was jerking awake with a crick in my neck and the immediate gut-deep sense that something had changed. The blankets were folded. Not pushed aside, not crumpled. Folded neatly, stacked beside the space heater with the corners aligned. The gauze wrappings were on the floor. The sleeping bag was draped over the hay bale across from me, tucked carefully at the edges so it wouldn't slip, placed by someone who had decided it deserved to be handled with care. And a man was standing at the far end of my barn. He stood with his back to me, looking out through the gap in the barn doors at the dawn coming over the Kalder Mountains. He was tall, well over 6 feet, broad across the shoulders, in a way that made the horse blanket he'd wrapped around himself look like a deliberate garment rather than a covering. His hair was dark and still damp. He held himself like someone who was accustomed to being the tallest thing in any room and had decided long ago to be still about it rather than take up extra space. There was a bandage on his right side. My bandage. My gauze wrapped over his ribs in exactly, the location where I had packed the wolf's wound. He heard me move. He turned around. Gold eyes? The same gold eyes that had looked up at me from the Black River water at 5 a.m. My back hit the hay bale. My hand went out sideways, groped blindly, found the handle of the hoof pick hanging on its nail. It was not a weapon. It was what I had. He didn't move. He stood at the far end of the barn, with both hands open at his sides, and looked at me the way you look at something you have been searching for, without knowing you were searching, with relief, and with a kind of careful, exhausted patience that had been carried a very long way. "You saved my life," he said. His voice was low, each word chosen carefully, placed precisely, like a man who knows that the wrong word right now ends everything. I said nothing. My brain was doing several things simultaneously, and none of them were producing language. "My name is Kael Ashvorne." He pressed one hand against his bandaged side, not dramatically, functionally, like checking a structural seam. "I need you to know that the men who did this to me will come here. They sent me into that river, expecting to find a body. When they find out a human woman pulled me out alive," he paused. "Let that sit. They will not be pleased about it." The sun broke over the Kalder Ridge outside the barn. Gold light came through the gap in the doors and fell across the concrete floor between us, warm and absolute and indifferent to everything it illuminated. My hand stayed on the hoof pick. "Then I guess," I said very slowly, "you'd better start talking." Chapter 2. What Gold Eyes Carry. I made him sit down before he fell down. He resisted for exactly 3 seconds. I could see it in the set of his jaw, the slight squaring of his shoulders, the reflexive pull of someone who has not been told what to do in a very long time. Then his hand pressed harder against his bandaged side, and the resistance went out of him like a slow exhale, and he sat on the hay bale across from me, with the particular dignity of a man who has decided to make a choice, look like it was his idea. I had seen that exact thing in injured animals. Pride going last, when the body has won the argument. "You need food," I said, "before anything else." "I need to explain." "You need food first. You burned everything you had in that river. Whatever you're about to tell me, you'll say it better with protein in you. I stood and brushed hay off my jeans. Don't move. He did not look like a man who was accustomed to being told not to move, but he stayed. I came back from the house in 8 minutes with scrambled eggs, toast, and 2 mugs of coffee. I set them on the overturned feed bucket between us without ceremony, the way I set food out for every recovering animal I've ever cared for, not gently, not fussily, just placed. Here, eat. The rest can wait. He looked at the plate for a moment and something crossed his face. Not gratitude, exactly. Something older. The look of a person who has been seen doing something they didn't know they needed and cannot fully hide their reaction to it. He ate. I drank my coffee and watched the barn light shift from amber to white as the sun climbed the ridge. Kael Ashvorne, I said when he'd finished half the plate. Start from the beginning. Not the version you'd give to someone you were managing. The real one. He looked at me over the rim of the mug. How do you know there's a version I manage? Because you chose your words very carefully in that barn just now. The men who did this. Not wolves. Not my people. Men. I held his gaze. You're already shaping what you give me. Stop. Something shifted behind his eyes, the door opening an inch. Something real pressing through. He told me. He told me slowly, like he was choosing the order of information carefully. Not to deceive, but because this was a shape he had never had to put into ordinary language before. He told me about packs, not the way wildlife films describe them, not the simplified hierarchy of alphas and omegas that shows up in half-read articles. The real structure, ancient, layered, built from 600 years of law and lineage and blood pacts and treaties made between mountains. The packs of the Northwest ran on a system as complex and rigid as any government, with its own courts and its own records and its own consequences. And above all of it, rarely, only in the generations that demanded it, one authority. One alpha recognized by the elder councils of 3 or more allied packs. A king. You're him, I said. Not a question. He set down the mug. Yes. And the men who cut you and put you in my river. My second. His jaw went hard in a way that told me this particular wound was not the one on his side. His name is Raith Volen. We grew up in the same pack. He trained under my father. He's been beside me for 15 years. A pause, the kind that holds years inside it. I trusted him the way you trust the ground under your feet. He decided to take what you had. He decided the world needed to change, and I was in the way of the change. The voice was flat now, factual, the tone of someone who has already done the grieving and is now in the part that requires clear thinking. He's been building toward this for 2 years, moving pieces I couldn't see. Quiet, patient work. When he moved last night, 4 members of my own inner circle stood with him. 4. I let that number sit in the cold barn air. What does he want? I asked. Not in general, specifically. Kael looked at me with those gold eyes, and I saw him decide to stop editing. He leads a faction called the Grey Claw, he said. They've been growing in influence for 15 years, slow, ideological, convinced that their position is the only rational one. He set down his mug. They believe that wolfkind and humans have coexisted too long, that the border territories, the places where our worlds overlap, where pack families live alongside human communities, where young wolves have built lives that bridge both, are a contamination, a weakness that makes the packs vulnerable. He paused. Raith wants those territories closed, every pack pulled back into deep wilderness, all contact severed, permanently. And the families in those territories, the ones who've built lives there, relocate or be absorbed. His voice was controlled, but something underneath it was not. He's not a cruel man, Elira. That's the part that makes him dangerous. He believes every word of what he preaches. He thinks he's saving people. People who haven't asked to be saved. people who are no longer asked. I sat with that for a moment. Outside the barn, the Idaho morning was going about its ordinary business, wind in the pines, the distant call of something in the east meadow, my property waking up around a situation it had no idea it was holding. "How many packs support you?" I asked. "5, before last night. Now, I don't know. They'll hear I'm dead within hours. Every hour I'm missing is an hour Raith spends consolidating, moving pieces, filling the gap before anyone can question it. How long before you can shift? The wound has to stabilize. Another day, maybe slightly more. My body can't manage the transition while it's in this state." He looked at his bandaged side with the expression of a man deeply frustrated by his own biology. "Then you stay here," I said. "This is a licensed wildlife facility. Large animals on this property are my legal normal." I looked at him directly. "As a human, you're my cousin Kael, visiting from out of state. Doesn't talk much. Very shy." He stared at me. "Very large," I added, "and very shy." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. The barest, most reluctant beginning of something. "You're not frightened," he said. "I told you. I'm frightened plenty. I'm just more frightened of doing nothing." I stood, collected the plates, headed for the barn door. "Rest. I have morning rounds. When I come back, we make a plan." He watched me go with those gold eyes, steady and intent, and I felt the weight of that gaze between my shoulder blades all the way to the first animal pen. I didn't let myself think about what that feeling meant. Not yet. I was checking on the 2 fox kits in the east enclosure, both healing from mange, both finally strong enough to be annoyed about being contained, which is always a good sign, when I noticed the tree line. Just for a second. A flicker at the edge of vision. Eyes. Low to the ground. Amber-colored. 2 pairs, maybe 3, perfectly still in the shadows between the pines. My stomach dropped clean through the snow. I kept moving. Kept my hands on the pen latch. Kept my breathing even and my face toward the animals, not the trees. The way you behave when something is watching you and you don't want it to know that you know. But my pulse was a different story entirely. They were already here. Raith had sent scouts before I'd even finished making breakfast. And somewhere in my barn, a king who couldn't yet shift was sitting on a hay bale, completely dependent on a woman who ran a one-woman wildlife rescue in northern Idaho. I finished the east pen check. I moved to the next pen. I did not run. Running tells them everything. Chapter 3. Eyes in the Tree Line. I finished the morning rounds in 22 minutes flat, which was 11 minutes faster than usual, and I did it without running because running tells predators you know they're there. I know how prey moves. I have spent 4 years watching it. I know the difference between an animal that is alert and one that has been spooked, and I know that predators read that difference in the first second. So I moved at my working pace, purposeful, unhurried, and I checked the fox kits and the coyote in the west pen and the kestrel in her flight cage, and I did not look at the tree line again after that first moment. But I counted. 2 sets of eyes on the east edge. 1 on the north. Possibly a 4th further back, in the deep shadows where the pines crowded together. I cataloged them the way I catalog any animal presence on my property, by position, by behavior, by what the pattern tells me about intent. They weren't moving. They were watching. That was the tell. Watching is not threatening. Yet. Watching is information gathering, which meant they were doing what Raith had sent them to do. Confirm or deny. By the time I got back to the barn, Kael was standing. He had found, in the time I'd been gone, the pair of oversized men's work pants hanging on the hook by the barn's interior wall, left there by the previous property owner 3 years ago, too big for me and never worth throwing away. He'd pulled them on under the horse blanket and was standing at the gap in the barn doors with his body angled away from the opening, just far enough inside the shadow that the light from the yard didn't fully reach him. He was looking at the east tree line without appearing to look at it. The stillness he had was not the stillness of someone trying to stay calm. It was the stillness of someone who was already past calm, past reaction, and into something older and more efficient. "How many?" he asked without turning. I counted 3 positions. Could be 4. 4, he said. 2 on the east side, 1 north, 1 positioned deep behind the north pair as a relay. He turned from the door, moving carefully with the wound. He uses relay scouts. The closest ones observe. The relay carries the message. Fast and clean. He's thorough. I built his scouting system, Kael said quietly. I trained him in it. That sentence sat between us for a moment. How long before he comes himself? I asked. Once the relay confirms I'm alive and sheltered. Hours. He'll want to deal with this personally. His jaw was set. Raith doesn't leave significant things to others. Because he doesn't trust anyone else to be thorough enough. His eyes moved to my face. You understand him already. I understand people who need control, I said. They're predictable in certain ways. I crossed to the workbench and looked at the barn wall facing east, where the old wood had gaps between the planks wide enough to hear through. Wide enough that if anyone was listening closely, they might catch the shape of words. Can the scouts hear us in here? A pause. Yes. Not every word at this distance, but the tone. The content, if they focus. I dropped my voice lower. Then we stop talking about things we don't want them to know, and we start thinking about what we do want them to hear. He looked at me steadily. What do you have in mind? Information as misdirection. We let them report back that you're here, hurt, without a plan. That the human woman sheltering you has no connection to any pack network. I held his gaze. Meanwhile, we actually build the connection. Quietly, through something they don't see coming. The scouts themselves. The young one, I said. East edge. The watching pattern was off. The others held tight, consistent spacing, disciplined. That one kept stopping, repositioning, looking back toward the others like it was checking whether its position was correct. I paused. Young wolves question before they commit. You told me that? It's a universal thing, he said slowly. Among wolves and among people. Then that's the one I approach. I straightened. Give me the message. Something true, something verifiable, something that can only come from you. He was quiet for a moment. Then his hand went to his collarbone, to the mark I had noticed earlier. Geometric lines, deliberate and permanent in the skin. A sigil that looked like it had been placed there with ceremony, rather than accident. Tell them the mark is whole, he said. Raith lied. The river gave him back. I filed it, nodded, went out the side door. The east side of the barn faced the river. I walked there with a water bucket, perfectly normal. I go to the east pens with water every morning. And I crouched at the young fox-kit's enclosure and let myself look toward the tree line just once, direct. One pair of eyes, young somehow, even in wolf form. There was a quality to the gaze that I recognized across species, a wideness that had not yet been replaced by certainty. I looked at the fox-kits and spoke as if to them. Low, calm. The mark is whole, I said. Raith lied. The river gave him back. Silence from the trees. I stood up, filled the water trough, walked back to the barn. 4 minutes later, Kael said, The east scout left position. He said it quietly, from the gap in the doors, without turning. Moving away from the property? I asked. Moving south, away from the other scout positions. Deliberately. He was very still. They're carrying it. Something in his voice that he was keeping carefully under control. I didn't call attention to it. Some things deserve to be felt in private. Then we have a window, I said. Before Raith gets the message and moves. Tell me about Sova Merath. He turned from the door and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him yet. Something that combined relief and caution in equal measure, like a person who has learned not to believe good news until it has stayed good for a little while. Sova Merath runs the Iron Bell Pack, he said. Eastern Territory, roughly 100 miles from here. She's been politically independent. She didn't commit to Raith's growing bloc, but she also didn't formally align with me. Cautious by nature. He paused. But her loyalty, when she gives it, is absolute. Can we reach her through something Raith's network doesn't control? The old messenger routes, paths between pack territories that predate the current political alliances, they were built before Raith's faction existed, and he's never bothered to map them all because they seemed irrelevant. His gold eyes were calculating. If the scout carries the message south and connects with an Iron Bell runner, then Sova hears from her own people instead of through a channel Raith can intercept. I sat down across from him. What will convince her to move? Physical proof. The triad mark, witnessed by an elder in person. He touched the sigil at his collarbone. It can't be faked. If she gets the message and believes it enough to come, and if she brings an Iron Bell elder with her, the verification can happen here, before we have to move anywhere. How long for her to reach us once the message arrives? He thought. 12 hours, maybe fewer if she moves immediately. And Raith, once he gets the scout's report? 12 hours, maybe less. He met my eyes. We need everything to go correctly. Things I can work with, I said. Things that have to be perfect, those worry me. Yes, a pause. Me too. Outside, the tree line was still. The North Scout held its position. The relay, deeper in the pines, was presumably sending word already. Raith was, at this moment, somewhere north of us, receiving information about a wounded king in a human woman's barn, and beginning to move. 12 hours. Tell me everything about Sova, I said. From the beginning. He told me. And somewhere in the Idaho wilderness, a message was running on old paths, toward a woman with silver at her temples, and eyes the color of deep water. Chapter 4, Silver Fire. The name Sova Merath meant silver fire in old pack language. Kael told me this while I redressed his wound in the barn's late morning light, working quickly and with the focused attention I give every injury I treat. Not gentleness as performance, but efficiency as care. The gauze had held through the night, but the edges needed reinforcing, and the bruising around the wound had come up dark and extensive, which was normal and also painful to look at. He didn't flinch. Not once. I have worked on animals that hold still like that, not from bravery, but from a kind of deep-trained discipline that says the body is a tool, and the tool must be maintained regardless of what the maintaining costs. I recognized it because I do a version of it myself. Silver fire, I said. How'd she earn it? The trials, when she was 16. He was looking at the barn ceiling, letting me work. Every young wolf goes through ranking trials, tests of strength, speed, problem-solving under pressure. Sova was losing at the midpoint. She was smaller than her competitors, and they had closed off every forward path. He paused. She stopped fighting outward. She went completely still. Quieter, and quieter, and quieter, while everyone around her expected her to push. A beat. Then she moved. Once. In a direction no one had seen coming. And she won. She made them think she'd given up, I said. She made them think there was nothing left to watch. He looked at me. Raith has never beaten her in a direct negotiation. Not once. I finished taping the last edge, sat back on my heels. Good. We need her. She'll want proof before she commits. He was already back to strategy. The wound secondary now, the mind ahead of the body. She's been independent for 7 years. She knows what it costs to move on uncertain information. The message from the young scout buys us interest, I said. But interest isn't enough. The triad mark is enough, if an elder witnesses it. He touched the sigil at his collarbone. Once it's verified and sealed, it becomes a permanent record. No one in any pack can dispute it. So we need an elder physically present. Here. Sova will bring one if she comes. His gold eyes met mine. The question is whether she comes. She'll come. I got up and rolled the used gauze wrappings together. She's been watching Raith build for years, and she hasn't moved because she's had no clear opening. We just gave her one. He looked at me for a moment. You're very certain about a woman you've never met. I'm certain about people who've been waiting for the right reason. I looked at him. You waited your whole life for someone to fight without a political calculation behind it. I saw it in your face when you realized I'd actually helped you. I paused. Sova's been waiting for a clean reason to move. We're giving her one. He said nothing, but something shifted in his face, the door opening slightly wider than it had before. 3 things happened that afternoon, and none of them were small. The first was Kael walking my rounds with me. Not because I invited him, but because I went out at noon, and he was simply there when I stepped out of the barn, upright, moving carefully, watching the sightlines. And he fell into step beside me without asking, and I decided that arguing was energy I didn't have. He moved like he knew how to be useful in a physical space, reading the terrain without appearing to read it, staying on the blind side of the treeline's remaining scout positions. But he watched the animals. The coyote in the west pen, whose fractured front leg was knitting slowly, and whose personality had improved from furious to merely irritated. The 2 fox kits, now strong enough to climb the sides of their enclosure and investigate whether the top of it was secure. It was. The kestrel in the flight cage, healing from a broken wing, riding the small updrafts the cage created with her good wing, and glaring at everything. Kael was quiet for a long time. Then, you talk to them like they're people. They are people, I said, topping off the kestrel's water. A different kind, with different language, but the same basic needs: safety, food, space to be what they are without something trying to end them. I glanced at him sideways. Not entirely different from what you've been describing. He considered this with the expression of a man who has just heard something obvious from an unexpected direction, half affronted, half recognizing. Pack politics, he said slowly, is not the same as a kestrel in a flight cage. No, I agreed. But the principle is the same. Beings with instincts and histories and things they're afraid of, trying to negotiate space with each other. I shut the flight cage door. The Grey Claw wants wolves to have one space and humans to have another. But your kestrel doesn't know about property lines. She just knows where the thermals are. He was quiet. He stayed quiet for the rest of the rounds, which told me he was thinking hard. The second thing, a text from my brother Dax. Short, ordinary, a different world pressing through. When are you coming to visit? We miss you. I looked at it standing at the east pen, the fox kits pushing against my knees from the inside of the wire, the tree line 30 yards behind me. I turned the phone face down on the feed post. Not yet. The third thing happened at dusk, and it was the most important. I was in the kitchen making food I wasn't going to taste when I heard a sound from the south fence. Not an alarm, not movement, something else. A single soft impact, like something placed carefully in the snow. I went to the kitchen window. A wolf at the south fence line. Gray-brown, lean, young. Sitting in the snow with its ears forward and something small and dark at the fence post beside it. The young scout from the east position. It had come back. Not to the east, to the south, away from the other scout positions, approaching from a direction the relay wouldn't be watching. I went out alone, hands empty, moving slowly. The wolf watched me approach. Didn't retreat. Let me come within 6 feet and stop. There was a token at the fence post. A small piece of dark stone, carved into the shape of a 3-pronged crown, smooth from years of handling, old and warm-looking even in the blue dusk light. The wolf held my gaze for one moment, then turned and disappeared into the dark. I picked up the stone. It was heavier than it looked. The carving was precise, not decorative, purposeful, the kind of thing made to be carried and recognized. I went back inside. Kael was on his feet before I cleared the doorway. He crossed the barn in 3 steps, and when he saw the stone in my hand, the thing he had been controlling so carefully all day, broke through completely, not dramatically, but entirely. Something opening. Something that had been held against enormous pressure, and was now, just briefly, allowed to be held without holding. "This is Sova's," he said. His voice was rough at the edge. What does it mean?" He looked up from the stone. His gold eyes were bright with something I didn't have a word for yet. Not relief, not grief, but the thing that lives in the exact place between them. "It means she got the message," he said, "and she believed it." He closed his fingers around the stone. "She's coming." "How long?" "If she sent this now, she's already moving." He looked at the dark barn window. 12 hours, maybe 10. I looked at the window too. Outside, the Idaho night was settling deep and cold over the Kalder Valley. Raith's remaining scouts held their positions in the trees. And somewhere to the east, on old paths that had outlasted every political faction that had tried to make them irrelevant, a woman named Silver Fire was moving through the dark. "Then we stop waiting for him to come to us," I said. "We use the hours we have." "What do you want to do?" "I want to know everything about the Elder Council. The verification process, the specific language of pack law around the triad mark." I sat down on the hay bale and looked at him. If we're going to win this on procedural grounds, I need to understand the procedure. He sat down across from me, and he taught me. Chapter 5. Raith he arrived at first light on the second morning. I had not slept. I had not tried. I had spent the night between the barn and the kitchen table with a legal pad covered in pack law notes, asking Kael questions until his voice went hoarse, then making more coffee and asking more questions. By 4 a.m, I knew the structure of Elder Council verification better than some wolves who had grown up in it, which was either impressive or a sign that I'd completely lost perspective on my situation. I decided it was both and didn't care. When the trucks came up the driveway at dawn, I was standing at my kitchen window with cold coffee in both hands and a stillness in my body that I had built through an entire night of deciding not to be afraid. 2 black trucks, moving slowly and with the confidence of people who have never needed to hurry to get what they want. They parked in front of the house, and 4 men got out. Then a 5th, from the second truck, and I knew before he was fully standing which one he was. Not because he was the largest. He wasn't. 2 of the others had him in height. Not because he moved fastest. He didn't. He moved with a deliberate surveying slowness that consumed more space than speed. He was the still one. The one who looked at everything like he was making a record of it. Raith Volen crossed my yard in the early light with the unhurried certainty of a man who has already decided how this conversation ends. He wore a dark coat that fit him precisely. Dark eyes that moved over my property with the systematic attention of a surveyor, methodical, finding the edges, measuring the distances, not looking for threats, cataloging assets. He stopped at the bottom of my porch steps. I had come out before he could knock, and I was standing on the porch with my arms crossed and my coffee still in one hand, because I was damned if I was putting it down for this. He looked at me. "Elira Nightbane," he said, unhurried, certain. My name in his mouth was a fact he had already verified, rather than a greeting. "You've done your research," I said. "I do my research on relevant things." His head tilted slightly. "May I come in?" "No." I stepped down to ground level, off the porch, because I didn't want him at the foot of my steps with me above him. I wanted us on the same ground. "You can talk from where you are." Something moved in his expression. An adjustment. The briefest recalibration of a man who had walked up my driveway expecting to manage the interaction, and was now finding that the interaction was not behaving as expected. "I'm looking for a wolf," he said pleasantly. "Very large, injured. He may have passed through your land in the last 48 hours. "I run a wildlife facility," I said. "Injured animals move through here regularly. What kind of wolf?" "The kind that causes significant problems for a great many people when someone tries to save it." His eyes moved past me to the barn, then back. Smooth, quick, cataloging. "You'd know it. He's impossible to miss." That describes most of the animals I work with. I held his gaze. "I haven't seen anything matching that in recent days. What's your name?" The question landed precisely where I meant it to. Unexpected, redirecting, forcing him to identify himself to me rather than continue treating this as a briefing. "Raith Volen," he said after a moment. I represent interests in the Northern Territory. What kind of interests? The organizational kind. He smiled. It was a practiced, careful smile, designed to read as reassurance without committing to anything. Miss Nightbane, I want to be honest with you, because I think you deserve honesty. He stepped 1 foot forward. One only. Whatever you may have encountered on your property, whatever story may have been offered to explain it, you are in the middle of something that has nothing to do with you. I have no interest in making your life difficult. My only interest is resolving a significant leadership question for a large and complicated community. He paused. I'd like to do that quietly, without anyone getting hurt who doesn't need to be. That's a very long way of asking me if I've seen something, I said. His smile stayed on exactly where it was, which told me it was not a real smile. Have you? He asked. I've answered that question, I said. Is there something else? He studied me. Openly, the way men sometimes study women when they're calculating how much of their real assessment to show. I let him look. I had been assessed by animals trying to decide whether I was worth the energy, and I had learned that the correct response was to look back without blinking and let them finish. You're protecting something, he said. Not accusation. Conclusion. I protect things professionally, I said. It's my job. This is different. His eyes were flat and accurate. He told you things. Things that made you feel like the right side was obvious. He paused. I want you to consider that you are hearing one perspective from a man who needed you to save him. People in need are convincing narrators. Are you suggesting he lied to me? I'm suggesting that the full picture is more complex than whatever version he had time to give you in the last 24 hours. He held my gaze. Whatever he told you about the Grey Claw, about our policies, about our intentions, I want you to know that we are trying to protect communities that have no other protection. The packs in the deep territories, far from human roads, they have no legal standing in your world, no rights, no recourse if they're discovered. Their only safety is invisibility. His voice was earnest and measured, and clearly something he had said many times before. Forcing border integration puts them at risk. The world I'm building is trying to keep them safe. By taking choices away from the ones who don't agree with your version of safe, I said. He blinked. Just once. By prioritizing the collective, he said after a beat. The collective you've decided gets to vote, I said. Not the families in the border territories, not the young wolves who've built lives there, not the ones you've been displacing for 15 years. I met his flat, accurate eyes. Get off my property, Mr. Volen. The pleasantness left his face, not into anger, into something much colder. The expression of a man reassessing a variable he had underestimated. This conversation isn't finished, he said. It is for today, I said. Come back with a warrant. I went inside and closed the door firmly. I stood in my hallway for 4 seconds with my back against the closed door. Let the shaking happen. Not fear, aftermath. The body releasing what the will has been holding together. Then I breathed. Then I went to the barn. Kael was pressed against the interior wall in the shadow, having heard every word through the old boards. He looked at me when I came in. He'll watch the property now, I said. He'll wait for proof. Yes, his jaw was set. He knows you're not going to give him anything voluntarily. How long before Sova's people get here? She sent word before dawn. 8 hours. He paused. Maybe 7. 7 hours. Then we keep him uncertain, I said. I go back out in an hour. Normal rounds. Normal behavior. You stay in the barn, away from the sight lines. I looked at him. Can you trust me to handle the outside? He held my gaze for a long, quiet moment. I don't know you well enough by any rational measure, he said honestly. But you walked out to that porch and didn't flinch once. He paused. Yes, I trust you. Good. I went for the side door. Then let me work. I went out into the cold morning and walked my property like I owned it. Because I did. Chapter 6, The Waiting Game. The next 7 hours were the longest of my life, not because nothing happened, because everything happened in the quiet, incremental way that the worst things always do. Not a crash, but a slow pressure accumulating until the walls of the ordinary feel dangerously thin. I have sat with dying animals through nights that felt like this. The hours that are full of nothing, except the knowledge that something enormous is very close, and all you can do is stay awake and pay attention. I did my rounds. I fed the fox kits, who were finally eating well enough that I was beginning to think about a release date. I checked the kestrel's wing. The feathers were coming back in clean and straight, the flight muscle rebuilding with a speed that still delighted me after 4 years of this work. I patched a section of the east fence where the wire had been disturbed, low down, in a shape that was not the wind. I made the standard call to the Montana Wildlife Service's check-in line and reported nothing unusual and used my most boring voice. All the while, the eyes in the trees. Raith's scouts hadn't shifted their positions. 3 visible, the 4th, the relay, somewhere deeper. Invisible. They were patient in the specific way of people who have been trained to wait without fidgeting, without losing focus. I was patient in the specific way of someone who has sat through too many difficult nights to spend energy on anxiety that doesn't serve a purpose. We were, in this one regard, well matched. At noon, Kael appeared at the barn's side door and handed me a cup of coffee without speaking. He had found the kettle and the grounds and made it himself, which meant he had been moving around the inside of my barn, and I made a note to check that he hadn't aggravated the wound. He had not. When I looked, the bandage was clean. How? I asked. I'm careful, he said. You're restless, I said. Same thing, for me. We stood at the side of the barn, out of the scout sightlines, and drank coffee in the cold noon air. The Kalder Valley was white and still around us, beautiful in the particular way of places that are indifferent to what is happening inside them. Tell me about the porch light in Veyridge, I said. He looked at me. You mentioned it last night? A man who leaves his porch light on for a son who went back to the deep territory. I held the mug in both hands. Tell me about him. Kael was quiet for a moment. His name is Aldrich Tove. He's lived in Veyridge his whole life. His son, Brennan, found out what he was at 17. A late shift, a traumatic one. He'd been living between 2 worlds since childhood without knowing it. He paused. When he shifted the first time, it happened on Main Street. At night. No one saw it. But Raith's Grey Claw enforcers found out, and told him he had to choose, pack territory or the human town. But not both. He was 17, I said. He was 17. His father had no idea what was happening. He just knew his son left one night and called once, and then the call stopped. Kael looked at the snow. Aldrich still calls the old number. Every Sunday. It rings to a disconnected message. He leaves voicemails anyway. I stood with that in the cold noon air. Raith believes he's protecting people, Kael said. I want to be accurate about that. He is not evil in the simple sense. He thinks every displaced family is a contained damage, a small harm to prevent a larger catastrophe. His voice was precise and utterly without sympathy for the position. What he cannot do is look at Aldrich Tove and see the thing he's actually built. He looks at policies. He doesn't look at porch lights. That's the difference between you, I said. He looked at me. You look at porch lights, I said. He looks at maps. He was quiet for a moment. The coffee steamed between us in the cold. Yes, he said. At 2 p.m, my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered on the second ring. Miss Nightbane. A woman's voice. Low, precise, with an edge to it like metal under sustained tension. My name is Sova Marath. Don't change your body language. Keep doing whatever you're doing. I was standing at the kestrel's flight cage. I kept my eyes on the bird. I'm listening, I said. I have 7 wolves at your southern fence. We came in below Raith's north and east positions. He left the south uncovered. which tells me either he miscalculated the terrain, or he's overconfident about having this contained. A pause. Both, probably. Kael is in the barn, I said. He can't shift until tomorrow morning earliest. The wound is stable, but the transition would... I know. We move tomorrow morning. Her voice was a set thing. Raith will push tonight. He's built a particular way. He lets pressure accumulate, then he acts at the edge of dark. Predictable, once you know the pattern. Another pause. What's your south barn access like? I need to know the layout. I described it. She listened without interrupting. Good, she said. Your job tonight is to stay on your property. If he comes to your door, you answer it. If he pushes, and he will push, do not go further than your porch. There is specific force in a human standing in a claimed space. It signals territorial claim in terms that even Greyclaw wolves respond to instinctively, regardless of ideology. Her voice was matter of fact. It costs Raith something to override it. Makes him look like he's targeting a civilian. And you? We hold the south. If his people try to circle behind, we intercept. A beat. Something shifting in her voice, just slightly, just briefly. He told me what you did, the river. A pause. Either the bravest or most foolish thing I've heard in years. It was just what was in front of me. Silence for a moment. Yes, she said quietly. That's the most honest thing I've heard in a while. And then, without preamble, there is a girl in my pack, 17 years old. Her mother is human, lives in a border town 40 miles north of you. Raith's people have been pushing her family for 2 years, separating them a little more with every new restriction. Her voice did not waver, but I heard what was underneath it. If he wins this, she never sees her mother again. Not legally, not safely. I pressed my hand flat against the kestrel cage. He won't win, I said. The line went dead. I went back to the barn. Kael looked up when I came in, and I told him about Sova's call in 4 direct sentences. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, something he had been carrying since the river, some specific tension I had not had a name for until I saw it leave, went out of him. 7 wolves, he said. She said she has the south. 7 of hers against however many he brings. He looked at the barn ceiling, calculating. It will be enough to hold a position. Not to overwhelm, but enough. She said you'll be able to shift tomorrow morning. Yes. He looked at his bandaged side, looked back at me. And the elder she'll bring? Ironbell has a council elder named Drennan. If he witnesses the triad mark here, before we move, we have the sealed record before we even reach the consolidation. Belt and suspenders, I said. He blinked. 2 redundant systems, I said, in case one fails. Yes. A pause. Exactly that. I sat down. The barn was warm and hay-smelling and ordinary in the way that it always is, which felt, right now, like something to be grateful for. She mentioned a girl, I said. In her pack, 17. Human mother in a border town. There are hundreds of versions of that story, he said quietly. I know. I looked at him. When this is over, the border territory protection, the Elder Compact, that has to be the first thing, not the third, not after political consolidation. First? He held my gaze. Yes. Promise me. He didn't hesitate. I promise. The barn went quiet. Outside, the sun moved toward the tree line. The shadows of the pines stretched longer across the snow. In the distance, the Kalder River ran dark and fast under the winter sky. Tonight, Raith would come. Tonight, we would be ready. Chapter 7. The night push. I heard them at 11. Not with my ears, with the animals. The fox kits went silent first. They had been rustling in their pen the way they always did in the late evening, small and busy and increasingly convinced the enclosure was smaller than they deserved, and then the sound just stopped. Completely. The sudden absence of small animal noise is one of the most reliable alarm systems I know. Then the coyote in the west pen pressed himself into the corner facing away from the outside wall and stared at it. Not the door. The wall. The direction that meant something was wrong on that side of the property. Then the kestrel spread one wing and held it, tense and still on her perch, like she was preparing to launch somewhere she couldn't fly yet. My entire facility had become a tuning fork, vibrating at a frequency I couldn't hear but could feel in my sternum. I was already awake, had been awake for hours, sitting against the barn wall with a blanket around my shoulders, and Kael a few feet away, doing whatever the wolf-kind equivalent of lying awake in the dark is. When the animals changed, we both moved at the same time, coming to the east barn window. "Southeast," Kael said, eyes closed, reading something I couldn't access. "They're coming in from the southeast, and splitting to cover the east fence simultaneously." I went to the high east window. The tree line was alive in a way that it hadn't been all week. Not the patient, stationary watching of the scouts, but movement. Fast and low and disciplined, like water flowing into a space. Multiple shapes. More than I'd expected. I started counting and got to 16 before I stopped. "He brought more than 12, I said. "He's nervous," Kael said. He had his eyes open now, and the calmness in them was the calmness of someone who has stepped fully into something and stopped fighting the shape of it. When Raith brings more than he planned, it means he's received information that worried him. He looked at me. Sova's presence. He found out about her people at the south fence, and he added numbers. He doesn't know how many she has. No, which means he's guessing high. A pause. That works in our favor. More wolves on the property means more witnesses to whatever happens next. My phone vibrated. Sova, no greeting. "We see them. Moving to intercept the southeast column. Your position is the house." "The house," I confirmed. "Front door. Porch light on. Stand there. Do not advance past the steps." A breath. "Do not run. Whatever happens. Do not run." "I know," I said. A pause. "I know you know." And then the line clicked off. I looked at Kael. "Go," he said. "You can't shift. I know." His voice was steady. "But I can stand in a doorway. And I will." He met my eyes. "You cover the front. I'll cover the barn." I went. The front porch of my house is 12 feet wide and 4 feet deep, with a railing my grandmother built herself 30 years ago from the pines on this property. I have stood on it in all kinds of weather, in all kinds of states, freezing, exhausted, sad, satisfied, furious. I know every board of it. I stood on it now in my heaviest coat with the porch light on and my arms at my sides, and I watched 16 wolves come out of the tree line into my front yard. They spread, a formation, instinctive, practiced, filling the space efficiently. They stopped about 20 feet from the porch, and then, from the center of the tree line, Raith Volen walked out in human form. Dark coat, surveyor's eyes. He crossed my yard in the moonlight like a man attending a scheduled appointment, and stopped at the edge of the porch's light reach. He looked at me. "Move aside," he said. "No." One word, flat and final, with everything I had put behind it. From the southeast side of the property, sound erupted. Sova's wolves hitting his column, the collision carrying across the yard like a wave. Raith's head turned toward it, half a second, just half, and in that half second, the barn door opened. Kael walked out, not running, not fast. Walking across the snow-covered yard with the slowness of a man who knows that the way he moves right now is a message, and the message is, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. And I know it. He stopped 8 feet from Raith. Raith stared at him. "You're dead," he said. "I was," Kael said. "Someone pulled me out." The yard went completely still. All 16 wolves, perfectly still, and I watched it move through them like weather. The thing that happens when a fact you have organized your reality around turns out not to be a fact. I have seen that look on humans. I had not expected to recognize it on wolves, but it is exactly the same. the system recalibrating, the ground going uncertain under the feet. "It doesn't matter," Raith said. His voice had recovered, smooth, controlled, the reacquisition of certainty. "One night doesn't undo 2 years. The transition requires 48 hours of witnessed consensus," Kael said. "You wrote that clause yourself. 3 years ago. You were very insistent about it." A pause. "You're still inside the window, Raith." Raith looked at him. Something moved in those flat, accurate eyes. "You would still negotiate?" "I always negotiate." "With the man who threw you into a river?" "Especially with him." Kael's voice was completely level. "Because you believe what you believe, and belief doesn't stop being real because the man holding it fails to kill someone." Something in the yard shifted. One of the 16, young, on the left edge of the formation, sat down in the snow. Just sat, a small, deliberate gesture of removal from the posture of threat, saying, "I am watching, not committing." Then another. Raith saw it. He saw it and he knew what it meant, and I watched the calculation happen in his face. The assessment, the adjustment, the decision. "Your people aren't your army," Kael said quietly, looking at the wolves. "They're your pack. There is a difference." He held the gaze of the sitting wolves. "You can go home tonight. All of you. Whatever happens next doesn't have to happen tonight." Silence. Wind moved through the pines. The snow on my porch railing shifted and fell. Raith looked at Kael, then at the wolves who had sat down, then at me, standing on my porch with the light on, and he held my gaze for the longest beat of the night. "She's the problem," he said, quiet, not angry, almost resigned. "She's the reason," Kael said. "Different thing." Raith turned, walked back into the trees. One by one, his wolves followed him. The yard was empty. The night was still. The southeast sounds had gone quiet. Sova's wolves had held. I let my breath out. It fogged in the cold air and dissolved. Kael turned and looked across the yard at me. I looked back. "Go inside," he said. "It's cold." "You go inside?" I said. "You're the one with a wound." He stood in the snow-covered yard in a flannel shirt in January, and for the first time since the barn at dawn, something fully opened in his face. Not the door an inch, not the calculation behind the eyes, but something real and tired and human and deeply relieved. He laughed. It was quiet and rough and completely real, and it was the most human sound I had ever heard him make. I felt it in my chest in a place I was done pretending was not there. Chapter 8. The Mark and the Morning. He shifted at dawn. I was outside when it happened, propped against the barn wall with my grandmother's old wool blanket around my shoulders, watching the sky go through its progression from black to the first thin violet, then the purple-gray that is almost not color at all, then the precise moment when the Kalder peaks catch the light before anything else and go gold. I had been watching that sequence every morning for 4 years. It never got ordinary. Inside the barn, something changed. Not a sound of pain, a sound of release, like a long breath finally let out, or a tension held for days finally permitted to ease. I sat up straighter. The barn door opened, and a wolf stepped out into the dawn. Not the wolf I had pulled from the river 2 nights ago. That animal had been half dead, waterlogged, his coat matted and dark with river water and blood, held together by whatever will an alpha king carries when his body is done, but his mind hasn't accepted it. This wolf stood on 4 legs with the full, settled weight of what he was. He was enormous, dark gray at the back, fading to silver at the chest and belly, and his eyes were gold, unmistakably, impossibly gold in the thin morning light, the same gold I had seen in black water at 5 in the morning. He looked at me. I looked back. "Better?" I asked. His ear moved. Forward, then back. In 4 years of working with wolves, I had learned to read that gesture precisely. Yes. I exhaled. Sova Merath arrived at 8 in the morning. She came in a truck that had clearly been driven through rough wilderness terrain for most of the night, mud up the sides, a dent in the front quarter panel that was new, the windshield carrying a crack from something that had hit it at speed. She got out alone, leaving the engine running, and walked toward the barn with the stride of someone who has been moving since before midnight and intends to keep moving until the work is finished. She was built lean and precise, with silver at her temples, and eyes the color of deep water in winter, gray-blue, clear, holding more depth than the surface showed. A scar crossed her jaw on the left side, old and healed, and clearly not something she had ever tried to minimize. She wore a heavy canvas jacket and practical boots, and she moved like someone who had long since stopped thinking about how she looked while moving and only thought about where she was going. She stopped 3 feet from me. 4 seconds of direct measuring assessment. "Elira Nightbane," she said. "Sova Merath," I said. "Silver Fire." Something moved in her eyes. Quick. "He told you." "He tells me things." I stepped back from the barn door. "Come in." The conversation at my kitchen table was not the conversation I expected. I had expected strategy, maps, pack law, elder council procedures, the mechanics of what came next. Those things came, but not first. What came first was 2 people who had known each other for 15 years, sitting across a table and speaking the things that politics and distance had not allowed. "I should have moved sooner," Sova said. She was looking at her coffee mug rather than at Kael, and her voice had the particular flatness of someone being honest about something that costs them. "When the Grey Claw began its second phase of expansion, 3 years ago, I saw the pattern. I have always been good at seeing patterns, and I told myself it was not Ironbell's involvement to have." She looked up. "That was cowardice dressed in the language of neutrality. You're here now," Kael said. "You nearly died." "I nearly died, and then I was pulled out, and then you got a message and you believed it, and you came." He held her gaze. "That's how it works, Sova. Not in one large perfect action, in the accumulation of smaller ones." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at me. "He speaks of you differently," she said, "than he speaks of anyone else." I met her eyes and said nothing. "It will matter politically," she said. Not unkindly. "There will be those who try to use it as a weakness in him. An alpha king who owes his life to a human woman, who has been sheltered by one, who returns to her. Raith's faction will frame it as compromise, contamination." She paused. "Are you prepared for that?" I thought about it honestly. "I don't fully know your political landscape yet," I said. "But I know what it's like to have people use who you are as an argument against what you do. I've been navigating that my whole life." I paused. "I'm not afraid of it." "Good," she said simply. And then she opened the territory maps she had brought, and we bent over them together, and what had been a crisis became, slowly, a plan. The consolidation needed to happen within 72 hours. Before Raith could solidify his narrative of succession, before the pack families who had already received notice of Kael's death could settle into the new structure deeply enough to make reversal difficult. Pack law required a public gathering, a formal verification of the triad mark before a full elder council, witnessed and sealed. "Ironbell's elder traveled with me," Sova said. "Drennan, he's in the truck. If Kael will consent to the preliminary verification here, before we move, we have a sealed record to carry to the consolidation. It cannot be disputed." "Belt and suspenders," I said. She looked at me. "2 redundant systems," I said, "in case one fails." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. "Yes," she said. "Exactly." The elder Drennan was a man who looked old in the way that some people do. Not frail, but deeply settled, like something that has been in one place long enough to become part of the landscape. He came into the barn quietly, looked at Kael for a long moment with eyes that were pale and clear and absolutely certain, and then placed both hands against the triad mark at Kael's collarbone. He spoke in the tonal language, 3 sentences. Then he stepped back and nodded once. Sealed, Sova said. Kael exhaled. The consolidation grounds are 80 miles north, Sova said, spreading the map. We move in 2 hours. I have 7 wolves on the south. They'll run alongside. Raith will know we're moving the moment we leave your property. He'll try to intercept. On the old logging road north of the ridge, Kael said. That's where I'd wait, if I were him. So we don't take the ridge road. Kael looked at the map. We take the eastern pass. Longer by 4 hours, but it runs through Iron Bell adjacent territory. He won't push there. He'll know we're using it. Yes, but knowing and acting are different things when the territory isn't yours. He looked up. He'll meet us at the consolidation instead. On legal ground, where he has to. That's better, I said. They both looked at me. If he comes at you on the road, it's physical, I said. If he comes at you at the consolidation, it's political. You win political. You told me that yourself. I looked at Kael. Make him fight on your ground. Sova looked at me for a long moment. He speaks of you differently, she said again, quietly, to no one in particular. Kael looked away, but the corner of his mouth moved. 2 hours, Sova said, standing. Gather what you need. I went to my house and packed a single bag and called my neighbor to ask her to handle the morning rounds. She asked no questions. She never does. I called Dax and told him I was going north for a few days and would explain everything later. He said okay in the tone that meant he had learned over 23 years that I always meant it when I said later. I came out of the house with my bag to find Kael standing at the edge of the property, looking at the Kalder River in the distance. Just looking. Not at a threat or a position or a route. Just at the river. I stood beside him. We go north, I said. Yes. And then we come back. He looked at me. Something in those gold eyes. The thing I had stopped pretending I wasn't seeing. Yes, he said. We come back. We went. Chapter 9. The Consolidation. The Draven grounds lay 80 miles north of my property, at the base of the Kalder Range, a valley that my maps named, but my maps had never understood. I had driven past the edge of this terrain 100 times in 4 years, without knowing what it held inside it. What it held was another world. We came through the last mountain pass at dusk on the second travel day, Kael in wolf form running alongside Sova's truck. 5 of her wolves spread around us in a loose protective formation, the eastern pass route holding exactly as Kael predicted. No interception. The landscape that came into view as we crested the final ridge was extraordinary in the way that things are when they've been hidden for so long that they've become more real than the things you see every day. The valley was wide and snow-held and full of firelight. Wolves, dozens of them in both forms, moving through the space in the fluid way of communities that know how to occupy a shared landscape without fighting for it. Pit fires burning in rings, their light warm against the deep blue of the mountain dusk. The great open-sided hall at the center, a roof of old timber on stone pillars, open to the air on all sides, built for exactly this. Gatherings of things that cannot be fully contained. And at the high ridge on the valley's northern edge, Raith's people. The Greyclaw, a line of them, wolves and human form both, watching from the elevation. Present because pack law required their presence at a formal consolidation. Watching like a storm deciding whether to break. How many did he bring? I asked Sova. 42, by my count. We have 61. She said it without triumph. Numbers aren't the point. The Elder Council is the point. 61 against 42 still matters if it goes physical, I said. It won't go physical tonight. Raith is many things. He's not a fool. She looked at the ridgeline. He'll make his case through his representative, try to create procedural doubt, challenge the validity of the Iron Bell preliminary verification. She paused. That's where we're vulnerable. If he can get even one elder to abstain, can he? There's one elder he's been cultivating for 2 years. Old Ferris. He's cautious by nature, and Raith has been very careful to present himself as the more conservative option. Her jaw was tight. He might abstain. What happens if he abstains? We need a majority to seal the consolidation. 7 elders, 4 to seal. If Ferris abstains, we have 6 voting. We need 4. 1 Greyclaw-aligned elder abstaining leaves us at 5 real votes. She looked at me. 4 is still achievable, but it's tighter. Everything is tighter than I'd like. She looked at me directly. This is where you matter. The life claim. The Elder Council has to acknowledge it formally. When they do, when they call you forward and the valley sees a human woman acknowledged in pack law, it sends a message that no speech can send. Her pale eyes were level and certain. It makes the thing Raith has been calling a weakness into the most visible fact in the room. I held that. The Elder Mira met us at the valley entrance. She was not what I expected from the oldest council member. Not frail or stooped, but smooth-faced in the way of someone so far past the stage where age shows on the surface that they've come out the other side of it. Her hair was entirely white, cut short. Her eyes were the color of winter sky, pale, clear, reading everything. She looked at Kael for a long moment without speaking. Then she placed both hands on his chest, one over his heart, one over the triad mark, and held them there. She nodded once. Then she turned to me. You are the one who pulled him from the water. Yes. Come forward. She took my right hand in both of hers, her grip firm and warm and stronger than her frame suggested. She turned my palm up. She looked at the rope calluses on my palm for a long time, her pale eyes moving over them the way a person reads something they find important. Then she raised her voice and spoke in the tonal language, and though I did not understand the words, the valley responded to them. A shift in the attention of every person there, a turning of faces, a stillness that was not silence, but something deeper. Recognition. When she finished, Sova was beside me. She said, "These hands held the king when his own people failed him. They are pack acknowledged. She speaks with the standing of a life claimer before this council." She paused. The whole valley heard it. I kept my face still. My chest was not still. The triad mark verification before the full Elder Council took 30 minutes. 7 elders in a half circle. Each one placed their hands on the mark in turn. Each one stepped back. The assent built in the tonal register, that sound that lives in the chest before it reaches the ears, building from one voice to 7 to the whole assembled valley until it was something you stood inside. Kael stood at the center of it, with his eyes open and his face entirely unguarded, and he looked, for the first time since I had known him, like someone who had been allowed to put down a weight they had been carrying for a very long time. On the valley's northern ridge, Raith's representative stepped forward. He was young, younger than I expected, with the particular controlled tension of someone carrying a message they did not entirely agree with. He spoke in the tonal language, and Sova translated in my ear. Raith Volen acknowledges the verified claim. He asks whether the Greyclaw faction may present before the Elder Council. Not in opposition, in negotiation. The valley went completely quiet. Kael looked at the representative for a long moment. 3 days, he said. He has 3 days to present his case to the Elder Council in formal session. I will hear the Greyclaw position before the Council, in full, without interruption. He paused. But the border territories remain open and undisturbed until an agreement is reached. That condition is not part of the negotiation. The representative looked at him. Something moved in his young, controlled face. He nodded. In my ear, Sova said quietly, "Old Ferris just moved to the center of the council group." I looked. The elder she had named, cautious, Greyclaw cultivated, had moved from the edge of the council half-circle to its center. The position of participation. "He's voting," I said. He's voting, she confirmed. Her voice was carefully level. 4 is enough. We have 4. Afterward, when the formal proceedings had dissolved into something warmer, voices rising, the relief of a community that has held a very difficult thing for a very long time finally exhaling, Raith's young representative found me at the edge of the firelight. He approached carefully. Correctly. With none of Raith's practiced ease, but with something more honest underneath it. Miss Nightbane. He stopped a respectful distance away. I have a message from Raith Volen. He paused. He says, these are his exact words. The woman who chose the river made the only choice she was built to make. He doesn't fault her for it. He faults the river for carrying the wrong thing to her door. I looked at the young representative. What does that mean? I asked. I think, he said slowly, it means he respects you, in the way that he respects things that work the way they're supposed to. He hesitated. I'm not sure it's an insult. I don't think it is, I said. Tell me, how long have you been with the Grey Claw? He blinked. 4 years. And do you believe what they believe? He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that the answer was in the quiet before he said it. I believe some of it, he said carefully. I believe the border packs are vulnerable and need protection. I believe the Grey Claw is right that the current situation is unstable. He paused. I don't believe walls are the only answer. No, I said. Me neither. He left. Sova appeared beside me. Who is he? I asked. His name is Corin. He's been Raith's second-tier liaison for 2 years. She watched him walk away. He sent his own resignation letter to Raith an hour ago. My network intercepted a copy. I looked at her. Raith is losing his middle, she said. The core will hold. But the middle, the ones who believed in the principle but not the method, they've been watching tonight. She paused. You changed things. Standing on that porch last night. Walking into this valley. Being acknowledged in front of 61 wolves and 7 elders. Her pale eyes met mine. He thought showing a human woman at the center of pack politics would embarrass Kael. He didn't understand it would do the opposite. Kael found me 10 minutes later, walking through the assembled crowd with the directness of a man who knows where he is going. We stood together at the valley's edge and looked at the Kalder peaks going silver above the firelight. Raith will negotiate, he said. I know. It won't be perfect. It doesn't have to be. I looked at him. The girl in Sova's pack. 17. The one with the human mother. His jaw went tight in the specific way it always did when something had cost him, and he was being honest about the cost. She keeps her mother, he said. I will not move from that. Then it's enough to start with. He turned to me. The firelight was gold in his eyes, and the valley was full of sound around us, and something that had been building since a barn in the blue pre-dawn had arrived at exactly this moment. Come back to the river with me, he said. When this is settled. When the negotiation is done and the borders are held. I want to see it in daylight. The place where you reached in. I looked at him. Yes, I said. His hand found mine. The Kalder peaks were silver above us, and the fires burned below, and I held his hand, and the weight of it felt exactly right. Chapter 10. What the River Remembers. April came to the Kalder Valley like an exhale after a long winter of held breath. The thaw was slow and then sudden, the way change always is. Weeks of almost, and then one morning the river broke open and ran full and dark and loud with the force of everything that had been waiting. I stood at the bank on a Tuesday in early April and listened to the ice giving way and thought that there was no sound in the world, quite like the sound of something releasing itself from what had been holding it. I had been back at work since February. After the consolidation, after Raith's 3-day negotiation session before the Elder Council, which had lasted 9 hours across 2 full days and had ended with a formal compact that 7 elders sealed on behalf of all the allied packs, I had come home to my 40 acres, and my animal pens and the ordinary rhythm of the work I had built my life around. The fox kits had needed feeding. The kestrel's wing was healing beautifully. The coyote's leg was knitting well enough that I was beginning to think about a soft release date. Life had resumed. It was not entirely the same life, but it was mine. The compact was not everything I had hoped for. The border territory protections were real and legally binding, but had required compromise on the enforcement mechanisms. A concession that made Sova's jaw tight every time it came up, which it did, regularly, in the calls between her and Kael, and the calls she made to me separately to express the version of her frustration she didn't want Kael to carry. I listened. I didn't try to fix it. Some things require the time they require. The girl in Sova's pack, the 17-year-old with the human mother in the border town 40 miles north, went home in February. I know because Sova sent me a 3-word message on a Sunday morning. She saw her. I held my phone for a long moment, then put it down and went to check on the fox kits, because crying in the barn is fine, and I was not ready to be where anyone could see it. The kestrel went on a Wednesday in late February. I carried her to the center of the property in the transport crate on a morning that was bright and still and cold. The kind of winter day that holds itself carefully, like a thing that knows it's almost over. I set the crate in the snow and opened the door and stood back. She sat inside for almost a full minute, looking at the sky with that one fierce golden eye, calculating something, deciding. Then she went. Not in a burst of panic, in a long, confident climb, banking once over the barn, once over the river, and then north, picking up altitude until she was a small shape against the blue, and then gone. I stood in the snow and watched the sky where she had been. I cried. I always cry at releases. 4 years of this work and I still cry, every time, and I have decided that is not weakness, but accuracy. Something leaving that you kept alive. Something restored to itself, that deserves to be felt completely. Kael came south on the 2nd Saturday of April, alone, in a truck. No political emergency. No scouts in the treeline. No crisis pulling everything sideways. Just a truck coming up my driveway at noon, and a man getting out and standing in the yard looking at the property with a quiet that was entirely his own. I was at the East Pen. I let him stand there because I had learned over 4 months of phone calls and visits the careful, tentative architecture of something being built between 2 people who are being honest about what they're building, that he needed to arrive before he showed up, that the stillness was not distance, it was how he stepped into a place. When he came to the pen, I handed him the feed bucket. He took it without looking surprised. He crouched at the fox kit enclosure and waited, and the fox kits, who were now old enough to be suspicious of strangers, inspected him through the wire for 30 seconds, and then accepted him in the particular way of animals that have good instincts. "The compact held through March," he said, watching the foxes. "I know. Sova keeps me updated. She likes you more than she lets on." "She lets on plenty," I said. "She just calls it being informative." He almost smiled. "The Castle Ridge families, the displacement injunctions are holding. Raith's Corps tried to push the eastern border point last month. 3 pack elders filed formal challenges within 48 hours. He looked up. "The procedure worked." "Belt and suspenders," I said. "Yes." A pause. "Exactly." We finished the rounds together. He was useful without making it a performance, saw what needed doing, and did it. No commentary. The coyote had to be assessed for the soft release timeline, which required a behavioral check that I walked him through while I did it. He watched with the full, focused attention of someone who finds the work genuinely interesting and is not embarrassed to show it. "You're good at this," I said. "You're teaching well," he said. "I'm not teaching. You're just paying attention." He looked at me. "Is there a difference?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "I suppose not." At 2 in the afternoon, I made the call that I had been putting off for 3 weeks. I called Aldrich Tove. Kael had given me the number in March. Not asked me to call, given me the number and said nothing else, leaving it entirely to me. I had thought about it for 3 weeks. I had written what I wanted to say 4 times and thrown 3 of the versions away. The 4th version was just, "My name is Elira Nightbane. "I know something about your son." He answered on the second ring. He sounded like a man who had been answering his phone for 3 years, hoping for a specific call. I told him what I could. Not everything. Not the details that weren't mine to give, but the shape of it. That Brennan was alive. That he had been pushed out of a life he had built, not chosen to leave. That the situation was changing. That there were people working to make it possible for him to reach out. Aldrich Tove was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I leave the porch light on." "I know," I said. "He knows too." Another long quiet. "Thank you," he said. Not dramatically. The way people say things when they have been waiting to say them for 3 years, and the word has become very simple and very large at the same time. I hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment with my hand on the counter. Kael was in the doorway. He had heard. "Brennan will reach out," he said quietly. "On his own timeline. But he'll reach out." "I know." I put the phone down. "Come to the river." We walked down to the Kalder in the April afternoon, through the mud and the thawing ground and the pine trees going green at the tips, the smell of spring moving through the cold that was not fully gone yet. The river was running loud and dark and full with the snowmelt, nothing like the black ice-locked thing it had been in January. But I knew it. I always know this river. I stopped at the bank. The birch tree was still there, the rope coil still on its fence post. I had not moved it. I had made a decision, somewhere in February, that I never would. Kael stood beside me. "Here," I said. "Yes." He looked at the water. "I remember the cold. I remember the current pulling." He paused. "I remember your hands." I looked at the rope on the post. When I went in, I wasn't thinking about any of it. Not what you were, not what might happen. Something was drowning and reaching. And I reached back. I looked at him. That's all it was. "I know." He turned to face me. In the April light, his eyes were very gold and very clear. "And that is the thing about you, Elira. You don't help from calculation. You don't help because you've decided the outcome is worth the cost." He paused. "You help because you are made that way. And in a world where every action is measured for its political weight..." He stopped. "You were the first person in a very long time who just reached." I looked at him. "I love you," he said. The same directness he brought to everything. No performance, just the fact. "I love you too," I said. "Which means there are things you need to understand." He waited. "I'm not leaving this land. These animals. This work." I held his gaze. "I will show up for the politics when it matters. I will stand in the rooms that need me. I will be what I am in your world, whatever form that takes." I paused. "But this is home, and you have to be willing to come to it." "I am willing," he said. No hesitation. "And you let me handle things my way sometimes." "I'm learning," he said. "I'm getting better." "And you fixed the east pen latch," I said. "It's been crooked since January." He blinked. "You've been sitting on that for 3 months?" "I was waiting for the right moment." I looked at the river. "This is the right moment." He looked at the river too. Something opened in his face. The whole door, every room lit. The thing I had been watching come open in increments since the first moment in the barn. He held out his hand. I took it. The Kalder ran loud and clear and cold in the April sun, and the rope hung on its fence post, and the pines were going green around us, and somewhere in the barn, the fox kits were 3 weeks from release, almost ready to be returned to the wild they had come from. Some things you bring back to themselves. Some things you bring back to you. And sometimes, if you are brave enough, and foolish enough, and honest enough to stand at the edge of a dark river at 5 in the morning and reach into the cold, you find that the river gives back far more than you put in. The Kalder kept running, the way it always had, the way rivers do, indifferent and generous and entirely without memory of what they have carried. But I remember the gold eyes in the black water. I remember reaching in. And I will never, not for one single day of my life, regret it. The end. If this story held you, if you felt the cold of that river in Chapter 1, if you held your breath on the porch in Chapter 7, if the porch light in Verage hit somewhere it wasn't supposed to, tell me, drop it in the comments. Which moment landed hardest? Which character stayed with you? Are you a river person? The kind who reaches in without thinking first? I want to know. See you in the next story.